If you're about to pick up Sage for the first time and find it a bit overwhelming to get started, then this video is for you. This guide will teach you how to play Sage at level 70 specifically, including everything from spells to abilities. This guide will go over both attack rotation and healing advice. Keep in mind that as a Sage, these two things almost go hand in hand. If you're completely new to healing, you may find my Healing Basics guide helpful as well. Now then, let's begin with the two signature mechanics of the Sage, beginning with Eukrasia. This is a spell that uniquely only has a single second recast timer that changes the effect of 3 other spells in your arsenal. We will cover these spells in their respective sections, although an interesting aspect is that all 3 of them have recast timers of 1.50. Additionally, both Eukrasia and these 3 spells are unaffected by spell speed, which means that the combination of Eukrasia and the follow-up spell has a total cast time of 2.50. Take note that due to animation locking, you cannot weave after Eukrasia and only weave a single ability after the follow-up spell. The other major mechanic of the Sage, Kardia, is an ability that you can use very regularly, which designates the target player as a receiver, gaining the Kardion buff, and you as the giver with the Kardia buff. Every time you use any of your damaging spells, your Kardion will be healed for a reasonable amount. Keep in mind that the cooldown of Kardia allows you to move around your Kardion very often if you wish. This can be very helpful if someone has taken a large amount of damage and you don't have the excess resources to heal them back up, assuming of course that the next attack is coming far enough out into the future that you can heal them back up in time. When you're still learning the job, I do recommend placing Kardion on your main tank and just leave it there. Next, let's talk about your attacking spells. While all of your attacking spells explicitly state that they heal your Kardion, this is not actually a requirement to activate Kardion, as if you have access to other attacking spells, most of the time these will also activate Kardion regardless. Doses is your basic attack spell that simply does some damage to an enemy. When empowered by Eukrasia, it turns into Eukrasian Doses, which is instant and applies a damage over time effect, DOT for short, which does slightly more damage. The enemy needs to survive for at least 24 seconds before Eukrasian Doses is superior to regular Doses. Keep in mind that the cast times and animation locking of both Doses and Eukrasian Doses are just so that you can fit a single ability between casts, which is known as single weaving. As a healer, the concept of weaving is crucially important to master, as it is the way you find time to cast healing without stopping your attack, and in some cases allow you to fit spell heals and ability heals in between each other. If you want to learn more about these concepts, I have a 1-minute short on the concept of the global cooldown, and a 1-minute short on the concept of weaving in general. The Healing Basics guide I mentioned earlier also covers this from a more healing-centric perspective. Next, Eukrasia does instant damage in an area of effect around you, AoE for short. This spell is superior to Doses on 2 targets and Eukrasian Doses on 3 or more targets, even if Eukrasian Doses lasts its full duration. As Eukrasia is instant, it allows you to fit 2 abilities between casts while using it. Phlegma is a powerful attack with an unusually short range, and it does both great single target and AoE damage. You can hold up to 2 charges at a time, and you should use these, as it is your strongest attack spell, regardless of the number of targets present. Early in a fight, you should prioritize Eukrasian Doses and Eukrasia depending on the number of targets. On a single target, keeping your dot up at all times is a larger damage gain than using Phlegma immediately. On AoE, Phlegma does more damage than Eukrasia, so delaying it until all the enemies are clumped up together lets you get the most value out of Phlegma. In single target fights, you can also use Phlegma as an instant attack to use on the move if you need it. You should also try to use at least 1 Phlegma so the cooldown is always ticking. Besides this, you can choose to keep the other charge for movement reasons or for when your party chooses to use damage buffs. You can also use it immediately if you prefer. Toxicon is another instant attack spell, and while it is instant and even has AoE components and range, it does less damage than Doses. So you should only use it for movement in single target fights if it is not a convenient time to do other instant spell options, like reapplying Eukrasian Doses. For AoE, Toxicon is better than Eukrasia on 2 or 3 targets, although after level 72 this changes to any number of targets. The damage difference between Toxicon and Discrasia is however small enough that I would recommend saving Toxicon specifically for movement, and on AoE only if you cannot be in melee range for Discrasia. To use Toxicon, you need a resource called Addersgall. This is produced by the 2 Eukrasian healing spells that I will get to in a bit. The main thing to keep in mind is that it is not worth it damage-wise to generate Addersgalls, and that it should be considered a side bonus of a spell you wanted to use anyway. Next, we move on to your healing spells. First, Diagnosis is a regular heal. It does about 3 times the healing of Kardion and is cheap. While empowered by Eukrasia, it turns into Eukrasian Diagnosis, which heals for slightly less than Diagnosis, but also applies a shield for a percentage of the healing amount. When it critically heals, it applies an additional, equally as large shield, vastly increasing the value of the spell. Assuming the shield is fully spent from damage, Eukrasian Diagnosis is far stronger than Diagnosis, and also happens to be instant. If the shield is fully consumed by damage, Eukrasian Diagnosis will also grant you an Addersgall to use on Toxicon. The regular shield is always spent first before the critical heal shield, and the critical heal shield will not grant an additional Addersgall. Keep in mind that using Eukrasian Diagnosis for the express purpose of generating Addersgalls is not worth it, as casting Eukrasian Diagnosis, being a spell, comes at the cost of an attack spell. This should not deter you from using the spell for its healing or shielding components, however. In a desperate situation, you can alternate between Eukrasian Diagnosis and regular Diagnosis for focused tank healing. This is to make sure the shield is spent before you apply another one. Prognosis is a simple AoE heal. When empowered by Eukrasia, it turns into Eukrasian Prognosis, which heals for significantly less but also applies a shield to all targets. In terms of raw healing, Eukrasian Prognosis is only slightly more powerful at this level. Additionally, if the shield applied to yourself is consumed by damage, then you gain an Addersgall. Next, Pepsis on a 30-second cooldown allows you to consume all the shields you applied from nearby allies to heal each individual for a fixed potency regardless of how much shield is left. The healing amount depends on which kind of shield was consumed, and Eukrasian Diagnosis or Prognosis combined with Pepsis is always superior to the non-Eukrasian variants. Take note that Pepsis will not result in gaining any Addersgalls. Due to the presence of Pepsis, it is generally recommended to not use regular Diagnosis or Prognosis outside of desperate measures, as if you need more healing, adding Pepsis is more effective anyway. With quick reactions, you can even apply shields, weave Pepsis, and immediately apply more shields if needed. The game will report that you missed Pepsis on targets without an applicable shield, and this is not uncommon to see if you attempt to use Pepsis for healing the tank, as the shield can sometimes be consumed by a simple auto attack. Now we move on to Addersgall. Every 20 seconds, in or out of combat, you generate 1 Addersgall, and you can hold up to 3. Spending Addersgall always has the side effect of recovering 7% of your MP. Now, let's have a look at the abilities that spend it. Rio Holy is a simple instant heal, uniquely with no cooldown amongst these abilities. If you need to quickly heal someone a lot, you can use Rio Holy, but in most cases your other options are superior, and finding other ways to heal someone so you don't spend all your Addersgall just like that. Holy is a simple instant AoE heal on a 30-second cooldown, and is more powerful than Rio Holy if at least 2 targets get full value out of it. Holy adds damage reduction to all party members in an area around you on a 30-second cooldown. If you have the Addersgall in excess to use it, it is a great option when expecting raid-wide damage. You can also use it to help the tank mitigate damage. However, remember that it comes at the cost of not having the Addersgall for, say, Rio Holy instead. And finally, Tavro Holy is a single target ability that combines the effect of Rio Holy and Kera Holy, instant healing and damage reduction, but on a 45-second cooldown. Take note that the damage reduction of Tavro Holy does not stack with the damage reduction from Kera Holy, so try to make sure these don't overlap. Do your best to manage these 4 options. I recommend maximizing the duration of the damage reduction effect on your tank by alternating Kera Holy and Tavro Holy as much as possible, and then keeping any reserve Addersgall after that for Holy or Rio Holy when you need it. Remember, even if Cradle itself offers no healing, reducing the damage your tank takes means that Kardion can more realistically deliver the healing necessary. Do make sure to use some Addersgall in general, as they are a large source of your MP regeneration, aside from lucid dreaming and passive regeneration. Now we move on to your other ability cooldowns. FFXIV is an instant AoE on a 60-second cooldown that applies a heal over time effect, HOT for short, to everyone in your party. It also applies a healing potency increase for a portion of its duration, meaning that if you plan to do a lot of healing in a short time span, leading with FFXIV can be very beneficial. Due to the potency of this ability combined with its cooldown, you can absolutely use it even just to heal the tank, so make sure to use it regularly. Soteria is a cooldown that increases the effect of your Kardion by 70% for 4 casts within 15 seconds. Due to the somewhat low power, I recommend using Soteria quite aggressively if your Kardion target can benefit from the healing. You can also use it to heal, say, a damage dealer that messed up a mechanic by moving Kardion to them and then using Soteria. Zoe increases the potency of your next healing spell by 50%. This means diagnosis, prognosis, and their Eukrasian variants. In the best case scenario, you won't have to use many regular healing spells, so try to use this as best you can whenever it is available and you have to use a regular healing spell. One good example is to use Zoe with Eukrasian diagnosis just before the tank pulls. Take note that Pepsis will not heal for more based on a Zoe boosted shield. Haima, on a 2-minute cooldown, applies a buff to your target. This buff immediately applies a shield to them and gives them 5 charges. Whenever the shield breaks, a charge is spent to apply another shield. If the initial buff runs out with any charges left, it instead heals the target for half the potency it would have shielded for, per charge. As long as you use Haima on a target that will take continuous damage, it will in most cases be well spent. The multi-shielding effect means that it will smooth out damage rather than block all damage entirely. In dungeons, I recommend using Haima on AoE Pulls. Finally, Icarus immediately teleports you to any party member or enemy of your choice. This can be helpful for dodging out of attacks or moving in close for Eukrasia or Phlegma casts. Don't forget about this action, as it is incredibly helpful. Now, let's briefly go over important role actions. Egiro is the Sage Raise spell and, as usual, has a long cast time and high MP cost, so make sure to use it alongside Swift Cast. Lucid Dreaming causes you to recover nearly 4000 MP over its duration. I recommend using it if you go below 7000 MP. Do not save it for when you're almost out of MP. It is better to use it on cooldown. Esuna allows you to remove removable debuffs, which can be identified by the blue line over the debuff. You should make time to use this spell on dangerous or particularly annoying or inconvenient debuffs, such as Doom, Heavy, the move speed slow, and Slow, the attack speed slow, not to mention Paralysis. Now, to round off, let's summarize an attack rotation followed by talking about some of the best ways to make use of your healing options. First, I need to underline that, as a healer, making sure your party is alive takes priority over doing damage, although, as a sage, doing damage does directly heal someone, so don't forget about attacking. For single target combat, apply Eukrasian Diagnosis to the tank and/or Eukrasian Prognosis to the raid, and then start by pre-casting doses as the tank is about to pull. Then, as you make your way to the target, use Eukrasian Doses followed by Phlegma, up to twice in a row. Alternatively, you can cast Doses a few times if you expect party members to use any raid buffs, so Phlegma lines up with these. After that, you simply cast Doses repeatedly, reapplying Eukrasian Doses and using Phlegma to make sure it doesn't fully recharge. Remember, you can save a Phlegma charge for moving. For 2 or more targets, apply Eukrasian Diagnosis, preferably before the tank starts pulling, and then apply Eukrasian Doses to enemies until 3 are closely enough stacked that Eukrasia can hit all 3, after which you use this repeatedly. For healing, remember, in a boss fight, you typically will want to adjust your cooldown usage based on what the fight calls for, so for these I would refer to the more general suggestions I recommended earlier. But for AoE pulls, you can somewhat prepare orders of actions to systematically deal with encounters. Most dungeons are segmented as 4 packs, split in at least 2 pairs, followed by a boss, repeated 3 times. Typically, one such pull takes around 1 minute from start to finish, meaning that 1 minute cooldowns used early should be available for the second pack, but anything longer tends to be only accessible on one of the pulls at a time. Let's split up this strategy in these 2 pulls. When the tank reaches their destination and enemies reach them, use Keraholi and Physis too. Once Keraholi runs out, use Tavroholi. You can wait a moment if the tank is healthy. For the first pull, add Haima, and for the second, add Soteria. As Tavroholi runs out, use Keraholi again. If you feel that Haima is unnecessary in the first pull, you can also swap the order. Remember that Zoe will be available for at least one of the pulls between bosses. For any additional healing beyond this, you will probably need to rely on Rioholi and your regular healing spells alongside Pepsis. But casting healing spells during combat where you could be attacking should generally be considered a last resort, and you should only resort to this if it is your last option. Now, that is all for this video. Thank you so much for watching. If you want to support me and my channel, you can like the video, leave a comment, subscribe and hit the bell to get notified when next I post a video. If you want to give even more support than that, you can also become a member of the channel. Fun fact, at level 72 and beyond, Toxicon is better than Eukrasia on up to 15 targets due to the combination of high damage and a lower area of effect component. This is, however, hardly significant since rarely you will ever fight 15 enemies at once.